What can an athlete do to really be proactive about, reaching out to brands? And sometimes too, I think that some of these athletes kind of get so tunnel vision with the big names, right? Like a Nike,
Mm-hmm.
Gatorade,
Mm-hmm.
think of those big brands in the sports industry. And if it's not that, then why am I going to do that, right? It's a waste of my
Mm-hmm.
time. I don't want to work with XYZ company that's locally in town, even though it's still a great opportunity to represent them, but also to for, myself and things like that. But is there a certain platform or resource where I guess some of the NIL activity or opportunities are done through more so than others?
So there are several platforms out there. I actually just talked with the owner, Jack Adler, with Out to Win. He's building a platform that's going to be huge, I think, not only for sports agencies or coaches, even recruiters, but for the student athletes, because there's a lot on there where they can kind of connect. But also, Market Price has that too. They have a platform where they literally connect brands with the student athlete like immediately. There's another one out there that I just read about. I can't think of it right now, but they instantly get paid from just doing a few posts for content for them. I'll have to look that up and let you know about that one. But there are other platforms they can go to just get noticed and start, But a lot of those brands, once again, are looking at your social media. So they want to see what influence you have, what you're, like you said, what they're talking about. How are they in the community? Do they provide for the community? Do they volunteer? Do they help when they can? I'm working with a D3 athlete right now, and he he cracks me up. He was like, so we do this, camp for kids at the beginning of our season every year. And we have a ball with them. We go play, football. We, hang out with them. We do all these things. And he's like, should I be posting that? And I was like, yes, 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 yes. Like, those are the things that people want to see is that you are real and that you do care about not just what you're doing, but you're an advocate for the kids, hopefully, that are going to follow in your footsteps. So I think those are the social media is just the biggest part of it and building that brand, but also going for those little local businesses, even if it's only, $50 a month, but they only want two forms of content, why not do that? Because then it shows those bigger brands like, hey, this is what I'm doing for my local community and this local business that I attend to. I go all the time to, or I use their products, or you know what I mean? It shows that that athlete doesn't, I don't want to say they don't care about the money because I know that's a big part of it, right? But it also shows that, like, hey, I want to work with brands that I love, you know, that I truly believe in, that I will never give up on, things like that. And so when Nike sees that, they're gonna be like, okay, this athlete is for real. She really gives it her all in all the content that she posts about a specific product, a specific restaurant, because she truly cares and loves those items. So I think that's part of, like I was saying earlier about your media kit, it's part of building all that. And you don't always get to go big. You may never get a big deal. But if you're helping, you're getting a little bit of pay and you're helping your community. Like, to me, that is the ultimate goal of this NIL, of these deals, because you can give back just as much as they're giving to you.
So talking about that too, I like that you mentioned about, hey, maybe some of it I'm not partnering up with a Nike, but I'm partnering up with something that I truly believe in. I think that that speaks volumes because sometimes, right, we see influencers, not necessarily always in the athletic space, but we're like, why would they ever partner up with, company XYZ? Like that just doesn't align with who I thought they were or or, kind of their previous background as far as all of that. So I think it really matters too. Obviously, these athletes are wanting to be compensated for, their time, for their efforts, their energy, all of that. But again, to that point, which I think is so big, especially kind of as you start to get going, is what's important to you, right? Especially with the companies and
Mm-hmm.
what do you value? that they're doing from a work perspective and making within the community, within, whether it's a sports environment, just the real world environment, you name it. But I think this is going to be fascinating a bit to talk about. Obviously, sometimes young adults aren't always the best when it comes to money, especially when we get some money starting to flow in. We're like, cool, $1,000, boy, oh boy, what can I do
Mm-hmm.
with $1,000 that just came in? Let me see, everything that I can come go and buy. Especially when it comes to kind of the right management with it, especially with a shortened window of NIL earning opportunity, right? There's kind of a finite amount of time between when you start to when you end, and you're kind of a senior in college, either, gonna have pro aspirations, maybe you're gonna retire and go on and have a great career doing whatever you truly love. But there's almost a finite timeline to that. And with those earnings, there's a lot of great that you can do, and there's a lot of mistakes that you can potentially make when it comes to, tax implications and, other regulatory things that are set in place there. But what are some common financial mistakes that you've seen athletes make in that space? And ultimately, too, I mean, what do you truly advise these, and I get, right, it's different for every
Mm-hmm.
individual, goals, and, kind of that game plan. But especially for some of these athletes who might be coming out of college with a little bit of student debt that they accumulated because maybe they weren't on that full ride, they changed up some stuff. Um, Maybe they're looking in a couple years to purchase their first property or move into an apartment on their own, things of that nature. What are some things that can, I guess, on both sides, right? Some mistakes, but also things that kind of help kickstart them during their high school, collegiate career, so that they're a little bit, a few steps ahead of just maybe the regular average college student or even student athlete at that time.
I truly believe some of these athletes, they just spend the money too fast, right? That's the number one mistake. They're like, wow, I have this money. I'm going to, provide for my family, my mother, I'm going to get that Lambo. I've always wanted these things. And those are the most common mistakes you see these student athletes making right off the bat. And the reason we know that is because it's posted on social media. But I think that to avoid that mistake, first off, you set a simple budget. You're like, okay, before you even start making money, you say, hey, I know that this is where this needs to go. I need to, maybe I pay off some of this debt first, or let me invest a little bit of this. So let's say 50% is for your needs, and then 30% you put into savings. I mean, if you start young, you start making those habits and it teaches you. And maybe you don't save right off the bat, but at least if you're being, diligent with where it needs to go and putting it away, or even like, so for instance, a savings account. You can start a checking account, savings account, and it has a little bit of growth. It doesn't have a lot, but at least it's something, and you have that money sitting aside if something were to happen, almost like an emergency fund in a savings account, right? A lot of people don't do that. They just, oh, I get this checking account, I'm just going to spend. Well, put a little bit of away where it's just out of sight, out of mind, like you don't know it's there. And then 20% of it can be for like fun, you know? You go, I'm going to, take my buddies out and we're just going to go have a field day at the golf course. But I think you set those little boundaries before you start making money. And I think that would be huge. Another common mistake I feel like is these kids don't realize, these student athletes, even adult athletes, even in the pros, they don't realize that it's taxed. This is taxable income that you are receiving. It is almost like I said earlier, a job. You're getting money to provide a service for a brand or a restaurant, whatever. And you have to realize that that is taxable income. So you are going to have to pay the IRS, the government, a portion of whatever you earn. And that changes based on what you make. Tax brackets, you have to look at that. If you're making 4 million, you're going to be in the highest tax bracket. Okay. So that's part of what you have to understand and know whenever you get this income. That's why I think it is huge. If you have no idea about financial advising, you have to have someone, especially if you're making those high end NIL deals. So that's how you kind of fix that, separating bank accounts. Also, I think for tax advantages, you're making that kind of money, even if you're not, to be honest. You set up a LLC or you set up some kind of business where you can show that, hey, yeah, I made this money, but I had these expenses for this business that I just started, and it can offset some of that taxable income that you may not have to pay as much now to the IRS. So I think really looking into starting your own business is something that would be huge for some of these student athletes. It's just another thing you have to add on, but it's something that can be so beneficial to your even your career. What if you started off and then now you're building it and now people know it after you're done with your sport, and like, oh, I've seen you've had that since college. Like that's amazing, and you've built that brand for your business now, not only for your name. So I think just knowing some of those, a lot of times I also think a mistake that is made is these athletes are not planning for the long term. They're just say, oh, this is only going to happen for me in college. I'm not going pro. I'm not, so why not just spend it all? But like I just said, you have that business that could go potentially into building you a career. Does it have to be in sports? No. Does it have to be whatever you decide? And you can even, like I always say, revamp the business once you become that professional, or you can change your colors. It doesn't always have to stay the same, but you have that business that people already know you've started, and now it's a long-term goal. It has turned into something that's more than just, oh, yeah, I was a college kid. So, those are a couple of, I think, huge mistakes a lot of these student athletes make. And if they just kind of have like a game plan before they even start getting money, then it sets them up for success for the long haul.
Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes too, right? We always think about today, what's top of mind today, and not necessarily what's down the road for 5, 10, 20 plus years into
Mm-hmm.
our future, as far as, things that are going to happen in life that we can set ourselves up right now so that, down the road it's going to be a lot easier for us, or we're going to have, more opportunity. And I know we talked about this way early on, but a little bit more about the compliance side, right? To your point, NIL is so new. It's in that infantile stage where, it seems like every single day, every single week, we're hearing about new changes, whether that's in certain divisions for certain sports, whether it's coming from, the NCAA or specific schools. But ultimately, too, how can athletes really ensure that they're following NCAA and school specific NIL rules? Because I know for myself, I would feel completely overwhelmed with all of it. And I can only imagine, how does someone start, especially at a school that might not be the best at promoting some of those specific rules, or even helping give some guidance on how these athletes can, actually help support their NIL journey during their collegiate time?
When I start with an athlete, I want to get that to know that compliance officer at that school. So let's say like my D3 guy that I've been working with, I called his school. I've emailed the compliance officer just so that I know I've looked at their rules, and I've really been like, okay, this is what we have to make sure that we don't do. A lot of them are you can't promote for like tobacco or alcohol or things like that. So I read that, I make sure I know that, but I also want to get to know the compliance officer because I want to work with him, because a lot of times, most of the time, you have to let the school know what endorsement, what sponsorship, what NIL deal you have gotten, because they want to make it where they know that you're not using their jersey, because a lot of times the schools don't want your jersey in the commercials you may do, or you posting pictures with you in your jersey. So you have to know those rules. And that's where, like I said, I come in. But if you don't have someone like me, that's the first step. You need to get in good with that compliance officer, and they can kind of guide you too. They can help you. But to me, that's the number one step, that you really have to make sure you're doing your compliance. Then look at the NCAA guidelines. You have to make sure you're not getting paid to play. they're all about the NIL, but if they find out that you're actually getting paid to play, you can get in a lot of trouble. And I know a lot of times that's probably been happening under the radar and stuff for these kids because they weren't getting these NIL deals, but I'm sure they're going to start coming down on that more now that there are being offered NIL deals. Also, like, you need to realize that the NCAA rules when you are getting recruited, and then also if you enter in that transfer portal, that there are collectives in the schools, so they can give you money, but you need to make sure it's coming from the collectives. Because if it's coming from just a straight alumni, that is pay for play. You have to know those rules and regulations in that part because the transfer portal is huge now. It's where you're going to get probably a lot more offers if you're especially if you're really good. But those collectives are set up for that. Like, hey, you can come to our school, we can get you this amount from our collectives. But if it's a straight alumni saying, come to our school, I'll make sure you get paid, you need to figure out where's the money coming from before you just say, okay, let's go. And then, like I said, you have to submit your deals before they actually get approved with the compliance officer so that you make sure that that you are staying compliant with the school because you don't want to get these deals and they get suspended for, not following the rules. That's just not smart. Okay. So just make sure you're compliant and then kind of just staying organized and knowing your contracts. I also work with a lawyer that looks over my contracts that makes sure that we are in compliant first off, but also that my client is getting the best deal they can from that local business but also that the local business is getting the best deal too. So all parties involved are happy and it's a cohesive relationship. I strongly believe that if you're going to have someone paying you, you need to know that company too. And you need to know a contact in that company because that is part of building that relationship. And that deal could follow you into your pros, could follow you past, this career. It could be someone that just sponsors your business when you're done. Building those relationships is huge. I would never want to just enter in with these athletes and these businesses without them being introduced to each other, without them really saying, hey, let's get to know each other and see if we even like each other. I know that doesn't sound like normal, but at the end of the day, you're literally working for someone and then they're working for you too. So it's very interchangeable and very much needs to be cohesive. So I think those are some big facts that need to be addressed before you start getting involved.
Yeah. And last quick question too. I know that this one's kind of added on last second, but you kind of brought it up there at the tail end of wrapping up. And I think it's all about agents, representatives, and finding somebody that almost you can trust, right? There's a lot of individuals in
Mm-hmm.
this space, like yourself, Lindy, who are doing things the exact, right way that everyone should in a sense, right? And you and I have talked about that a lot as far as, the true length that you go for representing these student athletes
Mm-hmm.
and the approach that you take. But also too, there's people in this space that don't always have the best interest in the athlete. They're more in it for, themselves, their business. They're trying to, throw in little things in the contract that hopefully the student athlete or, someone representing that athlete isn't going to catch when they're signing the contracts. Things like that, are ultimately going to negatively affect those athletes, when they're taking those deals. When they're trying to, really build themselves up, from a brand, from a business perspective, all of that. But what are some things, maybe it's more so red flags, but what can athletes do when they're first starting that journey? Maybe they're looking out at different agents, different individuals, different professionals to represent them along their journey versus hey, maybe I shouldn't go with this person, but ultimately this other person over here who I've been talking to and kind of emailing back and forth seems like a great fit, not only for myself, but also to the work that they've done in the past with, different athletes, things like that.
So I do think that I'm going to be very blunt right now, and I'm not an expert in everything, right? I'm not an expert in social media. That's not my field. I do have some background and I do know I can get you started, on like how we build your brand and how we get you noticed and what that looks like for you based on who you are as an athlete, but also outside as, just a human like all the rest of us. And I'm not a lawyer, so I had to find these kind of a social media content creator that if you really want to dig into and really don't want to do it yourself, I have someone that we can work with. I have a lawyer that looks over contracts because I'm not in that field, but I do have the financial background. So that's where I can really help you as well. But I really just wanted to educate. And I think that you've got to find someone, like you said, that you trust, that you can build a relationship with, that that if something were to go wrong or if a business was trying to get the better of you, that you trust your person that's, mentoring you, that's showing you how to get things done wholeheartedly, because just like everywhere, there's crooks out there, and these kids are young, especially like me. I'm starting with eighth graders. Like the parents have got to trust me. I mean, even the coaches have got to trust me because if they don't, I'm not going to get very far with, they're just going to be like, oh, she's just, trying to scam us, or she's just, but I truly believe you have to build that relationship because that's the only way. So, me being in the financial world for 2 years, I'm telling you right now, it takes me probably 5 appointments before I get the sell because I've literally sat my client down. I really talk to them. I really go over every detail. I do not let them sign until they completely understand what I am showing them. And to me, that's huge. I'm not just one of those one and done, blah, 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 let's get out of here. We've got the deal. No, I am perfectly fine with us looking at it in 3 months and saying, I want to revamp this. I want to add, I think I have some more time to add some more social media content. Do you think they would go for that and give us, renegotiate the deal? I am perfectly fine with that, even if we sign a 12-year contract and you may get told no by the local business, which is part of it because you already signed the deal. But I am not just like in it to just get the deal and then let's get out. Like I said, I'm truly building these relationships to where people will trust me and they will look to me for not just the NIL deal, but like if you want to talk to me spiritually, if you want to talk to me about mental awareness, I'm not an expert in that either, but I know somebody now, Josh, that can, but I just think you have to have this team around you because I don't think you can always do it yourself. And if you find someone that says I can do it all, then that might be a red flag. That might be something that you need to kind of reevaluate. I've just been building this, like I said, this power team that I truly respect. And I want you to meet them too. That's what I was about to say. That's where I was going with that. Sorry. I want you to meet them too. I don't want to, oh, I'm going to send you this contract and blah, blah, blah. No, I want us all three to get together and say, hey, she used Shannon. She's my lawyer. Shannon, what do we need to negotiate? Does this look good? Is everything in there in writing? Because a lot of people also don't know about like exclusivity. So I am also an agent that does not make you sign an exclusive contract with me. So, for example, if you got a better deal from some other person out there that could get you a better deal than I can get you, I am all about you going and doing that. I want your loyalty. I'm not saying that I don't, but if there is something that that person can do for you that I can't, I am not holding you back. I want you to succeed in all areas of your life. And that part right there, you can go and do that contract with them, But there's a lot of agents that aren't like that. A lot of agents want you signing only with them and that's it. So, and then also just looking at the money, how much money is that agent taking from you? I think average is like 10 to 30%, just depending on the deal. But that's another thing to look at. If they're trying to take 50% of your earnings, like what? No, you know? And don't get me wrong, I have like a consult fee, where we set up and we go over like an hour and a half. I do require a payment for that, but it's also something you get to take away with you. If I've built you a brand or if I've done, you get to take that with you, even if you don't decide to go with me. And you get to give all the knowledge I've just given you, you get to go and do it on your own or take it somewhere else. So those are things that I think you need to look at whenever you're trying to find someone to work with you. And I think it's huge.
Yeah, I mean, after talking with Lyndie beforehand and obviously too, talking with her throughout this meeting and specifically going into a lot of just the tiny details of NIL and really exploring that a lot more. Honestly, for everybody listening in too, right? Like Lyndie definitely has my stamp of approval. And I think too, right? The thing
Thanks,
that stands
Josh.
out the most is that she's really surrounding herself with professionals who she trusts, but she's ultimately taking the step in the direction of saying, hey, you know what? I'm going to be vulnerable. I don't know everything that's out there when it comes to law, contracts, specifics like that. I don't know everything when it comes to, the mental side, when it comes to social media. But boy, do I have a network that I've built out and that I trust, and that, when you're in my circle, now you're expanded into their circle as well. And so I think that
Hmm.
that's really, really important. And I think too, the one thing that, I've seen that at least on my eyes, there's so much about Lyndie that is amazing and great. But the one thing that stands out the most to me versus all the stuff I've seen in the NIL space is her financial knowledge and her financial literacy knowledge, because I think sometimes you get an agent and it's great, hey, we you just got all that money coming in, and now there's no kind of help on the education side of that, right? They get it in and cool, awesome, I just got $1,000. Now what? Now do I go blow it? Now do I go spend it on stuff that maybe I really shouldn't be? I think Lindy's ultimately that difference maker who has realized kind of the issue at hand and said, hey, financial literacy is so important, not only within student athletes, but within young adults, at the high school and collegiate level. And a lot of those habits that they make and form during those years, they're going to go into that adult life as well. And so the more good habits that we can form when we're younger, the better we're going to set ourselves up for it in the future. So again, too, long-winded story, but again, Lyndie is a fantastic resource. And with that being said, too, for everybody listening in on YouTube as well as Spotify, we're going to link all of her information down below so that you guys can check her out, inquire about any opportunities that you guys may have. Again, too, she's working on building up a lot of clientele right now and does an awesome job in that space. So really looking forward to
Hmm.
continuing to work with her and ultimately to really help put a lot of athletes in front of her face, in front of her business, and just see how many people she can really help out in that space. But with that being said, Lyndie, thank you so much for the conversation. I learned so much, and I'm sure everybody else on the call did as well.
Thank you, Josh. I appreciate it. And again, thanks for having me on here.